yesterday. I was so excited about getting all that cow manure from my neighbor that appears to be really well composted. And you know, I said, oh man, it's a cool compost. I'm ready to it's already broke down. I'm ready to plant right into it. But then I got to thinking, I told myself the same thing about the goat manure when I shoveled it up out of the barn. And I think maybe what it was it was so concentrated with nitrogen and didn't actually have a whole lot of carbon in it. I don't know that, but that's just what I'm wondering. Because when I mixed that goat manure with sawdust and then added water, then it kicked off a hot compost. Of course, now it's composting in my raised bed and I can't really plant into it. So I'm going to do an experiment. I've got all that lovely cow manure that I got that I'm so excited about. I'm going to shovel up as much sawdust here as I can get, and I'm going to make a second pile over there by the cow manure. I'm going to mix part of it with this sawdust and then give it a couple days and see what happens. If it kicks off a compost, then I got my answer. If not, well, then I still got an answer, because if it doesn't start composting, then I'm going to say, okay, I can plant directly into that cow manure, which is my hope. But if it starts composting, so be it. It's still good soil. So let me get some of this shoveled up. I think I've probably got about 2 tractor bucketfuls here. I'm going to clean all this out, and then we'll get over there to our poop pile, which is only about 50 yards away, and we'll start mixing it up.
Dad, I killed that worm.
You killed a worm?
Uh-huh.
What kind of worm? All right, now this is a bit more labor intensive than I like, but I think it'll do for now. So I've got my sawdust here, got my manure here, and oh man, this stuff's just crawling ants. I didn't put ants yesterday, now it's got a bunch of ants on it. Anyway, I'm just going to be taking a scoop from each side, and I'm going to build a third pile right here in the middle. So that's going to be just a rough mix. I'm not counting. Emerson, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Can't explain your problems. So I'm just going to build a third pile right here in the middle, rough mix. Probably going to be a little heavy on sawdust at that rate. I might go 2 to 1, I don't really know. But just kind of wing it. All I'm trying to do is get a mixed pile, give it a couple days, see if it heats up. That's all I'm trying to do here. If it doesn't, great. But ultimately what I'd like to do long term, of course, instead of me having to dump separate piles and then, you know, mix them together by shovel, ultimately I'll just have a big pile of manure, a big pile of sawdust, and I'll mix it with the tractor bucket. That'll be much better, much more better than me trying to shovel it all by hand. But I'll get a better ratio like this, and for now with just this small volume that I got, that's what'll work. But if this works out well, then future planting means a lot bigger pile of that and a lot big pile of this and a much bigger third pile. That's the goal. So let's get to mixing.
What are you doing? I'm just trying to get mixing.
Mixing the two together.
Wow.
Let's go 2 to 1 on the manure to sawdust.
Why are we doing that? Daddy's flipped open. Now it.
Basically building a little layer cake.
Why? Why are you building?
Because I'm thinking the sawdust, like I said, is basically pure carbon, and the manure should be high in nitrogen.
So what are we doing in the wrong pattern?
And you can see it's mixing really well here as I go. Once the pile starts to build up, I just throw my scoop right on the peak and it kind of layers down on its own, flows down.
Can I sit there for a minute? I need to sit there. But I gotta have my space. Put it right. You can put it there. Go over there.
Get one more on there. Okay, you guys get the point. Let's finish it out here. All right, so here's my final pile. Not huge, but Again, all done by hand, so good enough for now. Got most of the sawdust used up. I didn't really feel the need to clean it completely off the ground because there'll be more. But you can kind of get an idea of the mix now. You can see some sawdust peeking through, obviously mostly manure. But it actually worked out really well. The higher the peak got, the less I had to switch back and forth. So you guys saw there at the beginning, I was back and forth between both piles a lot, but as the pile got bigger, I could stay with one pile and throw on 5 or 6 shovels full and then switch over to the other pile and do, you know, 5 or 6 off of it. So I wasn't 1 and 1 or 2 and 1 back and forth, which actually helped. And then as the pile grew, I actually let it grow into the manure pile over here. So I wasn't having to throw as far versus if I tried to grow it outward. So that'll work. If I bring in more manure, I'll just pile it up on the back side over here. So anyway, yeah, the goal here, see if this kicks off a compost or not. When I was in high school, I worked at a sawmill, and sawdust on its own, very concentrated, will eventually start to compost. But it doesn't happen very quickly. It'll get hot on the inside, but it won't necessarily break down very quickly. So it wouldn't surprise me if this kicks off a compost just because of the addition of the sawdust, whereas the manure itself may have been just fine. I'd like to actually take a little sample of this manure and see if I can't do just a nutrient sample on it. I wonder, I don't have a test kit myself to check for nitrogen and whatnot for a soil test. My wife may have one, but I kind of doubt it. So anyway, I'm not too concerned about it really. But like I said, mix them together here, and we'll give it a couple of days. I've actually got to go out of town for a couple of days, so when I get home, that'll be perfect. I'll just cut a hole in the side and see how it feels. But you know, even if it is heating up a compost, that's fine. I still need to find a good way to use up this sawdust. So the question is just whether or not I have to compost the sawdust with the cow manure or whether I'll compost it with my goat manure. But it will get used up and it will become soil, no doubt about that. So we'll just have to see how this goes and I'll let you know. Okay, so it's been, I think 5 days, I think, since I brought all this cow manure home, and I guess 4 days since I restacked it and mixed in sawdust. And this was a test. I wanted to see what it would do as far as like composting. Well, interestingly enough, I actually expected the pile with the sawdust blended in to start composting, and it's the opposite. So this pile, again, mixed in sawdust. So if assuming the manure was high nitrogen, we mixed in sawdust, which is high carbon, and I expected there to kick off a compost. What's actually happening is just the sawdust. You can actually feel a little bit of heat in the sawdust, but the overall temperature of the core of the pile is relatively cold. I would just go ahead and say it's cold. It is not hot composting. The sawdust itself is actually warm. This pile, which is pure manure, essentially, which I figured would be dead, is actually significantly warm, as if it is composting. So kind of like I said, backwards to what I expected, because I just assumed that the manure would be high in nitrogen, but that it wasn't composting, basically because it didn't have enough carbon. And I assumed that the sawdust, you know, high in carbon, wouldn't really compost it down the nitrogen. So I thought these two put together would kick off a compost like it did with the goat manure. But actually what's happened is kind of the opposite. Like I said, this is not composting and this is. So yeah, I don't really know how to explain that. Maybe this pile is more dense, and with all the rain that we got, it didn't soak in all the way. And maybe this pile is just cold because the rain kind of oversaturated. I don't really think so. But now I've got a problem, because I thought this would answer my curiosity. So when I had the pure goat manure and mixed it with pure sawdust, I got a really good hot compost, which I didn't really expect because I thought the goat manure was neutral. When I took pure cow manure, which was cool, mixed it with pure sawdust, I expected the same thing to happen and that this would kick off a hot compost, and it hasn't really. Yet the pure cow manure now has heat inside of it, whereas when I went and shoveled it all off the ground, it did not. So yeah, I am not a composting expert yet. Well, I don't know what it really takes to be one, other than just mix nitrogen and carbon sources together. But yeah, I was hoping this would, like I said, kind of resolve my curiosity and figure out what exactly I need to do next. Because
Dad,
I
this
was
compost
thinking,
is cold right here.
I'd be able to plant directly into the cow manure
Look,
because it was so cool when I went and shoveled it up and you didn't have any smell. But now it's like it wants to compost again. Although I think I can probably still plant directly into it. This, apparently, mixed and cut, I could plant right into because the only thing putting off, that I can tell, the only thing putting off heat in here is the sawdust itself. It acts like the cow manure is not putting off heat. But that doesn't make sense because the pile of pure cow manure is putting off heat. I don't know. I think there's a flaw. I think there's too many variables. I think maybe this pile did get saturated with rainwater because I restacked it and it's very loosely stacked. So I think it probably soaked up a lot of moisture, whereas this pile being more dense did not soak up the moisture. Maybe that caused it to not get cooled off by the rains. That could be a variable. I don't know that. Oh, well, anyway, I was hoping I could give you guys like an update that made sense, but now I think I'm more confused than before I started. But I will say, over in the garden there, where we had the surprise compost, then I went back through and I said, well, I'm, urgent, I want to get some broccoli planted, so I leveled out a small portion of it, watered it down to cool it off, and planted it, and the broccoli plants appear to be doing well. They've not gotten zapped anyway. And they haven't really shown any signs of transplant shock. So hopefully they start to take off here in the next week or so and I start to really see some new flush growth on them. That would encourage me anyway, give me some real encouragement that I might actually have some hope of a fall garden. But we did just get some cool weather move in, which is exciting. It finally has cooled off a little bit and it's supposed to cool off more next week. So the first signs of fall have finally come up on us. We'll just have to see how they progress from here. But yeah, again on the compost, I don't know. Looky here.
What?
Emerson, good job, buddy. But I think that's a weed. I don't think we really want that growing in our compost.
No, we don't.
But you did a good job planting it.
It's a weed.
You got it bearing up real
These
nice.
are the goats to eat.
What'd you say?
These are these for the goats.
Oh, okay, you got it?
Yeah, so
Oh, that's a rock. Can I have that rock?
Yeah.
Oh, rocks are in high demand around here. We love rocks.
Me too.
And Emerson, what do you got?
Concrete.
Concrete?
Yeah, a piece of concrete.
I don't think it is. I think it's a piece of clay. Can you break it? No, don't throw it on the ground. Break it with your bare hands. Show me how strong you are. Emerson, can you do it?
I got
Take it, break it on your knee.
hard.
Oh yeah, you can totally break that. Go. Break it over your knee.
Can't do it, Mark.
That's a piece of really smooth clay. That's what that is. It's not. It's not
I can't even do
It's
it.
not a rock.
Can you try?
No, I don't want to break it. It's very pretty.
Dad, should we take a picture of it?
It's really pristine.
Dad,
Maybe it's not clay. Maybe it's fiberboard.
what's a fiberboard?
Doesn't matter. All right, well, that's enough. I got distracted. Yeah, composting questions, I guess.